All right, I just hit record here, and I'm sitting here with Marc Polymeropoulos. Marc, do you want to tell us a joke about your last name?
All right, so first of all, you got it right. So I got to give you kudos for that. But as I've been out kind of in the public, over the last year or two, everyone kind of butchers my name, and so but they eventually get it. But even when I was in kind of the secret world of the CIA, it was an issue. So the best story I have is it was 2006. I was in the Middle East, and I was the manager in one of our CIA stations, and the president's briefers. It was George W. Bush. His briefers were going down the White House, and they called me on the secure line, and they wanted to know my views on a certain situation. And man, I was pumped. Like, hey, man, the president wants to know what I have to say. So I tell him this, and they said we'll call you back in a couple hours. So I'm waiting by the secure phone late at night, and I get a call, and I was like, how was it? Like George W. Bush, like this is my guy, and they respond. They're like, yeah, well, that thing we're talking about, well, it went fine, but most of the time in the Oval Office, we spent trying to pronounce your last name. So I was like, all right, well,
So much for
gotta be
your
known for
work.
something, right? Anyway, so you did a great job there. So
This is much okay. So this is my son and my wife, right? So we're not talking about the president, but I don't know. It's probably been a month now, but we always. My wife is really nervous about my kids eating grapes and popcorn, right? Kids choking on popcorn and kids choking on grapes. And she told my kids, I have a daughter who's 7, my son is 4, and she told them this story of, I forget the exact story, but anyway, the culmination was there was an X-ray of a young a boy or girl with a grape. You could see like they aspirated it, or it was a very dangerous situation. So this long 5-minute story about why you have to be careful, chew them up, cut them in half. Immediately when she stopped, it was like this moment where we're thinking they're really getting this. And he said, was it a red or green grape? I was like, dude,
right.
never mind, Rock. It
Never
was,
mind.
we don't know. It was white
Right.
as per the
There you
X-ray.
go.
We were just talking. I do want to get into your early life and how you came to be in the CIA and your life post CIA. But you and I were just talking about how you've kind of had like you've lived your life behind the scenes in the CIA, and you were mentioned current times you were quoted. So just bring us up
Sure.
to speed on kind of your current life and maybe this recent boom in media coverage for you.
Sure. So first of all, after being 26 years in the shadows, it's not certainly not what I planned on doing. When I retired. I mean, one of the things you do when you join the CIA is you sign a secrecy agreement, which is not to say you can't talk about your life that you work there, but you really you obviously can't reveal classified information. But just in general, it's the same thing kind of in the special operations community. Perhaps it's frowned upon a little bit to go out in public. But a couple things kind of happened to me after I retired. One is while I am kind of super apolitical and I voted on both sides of the aisle, I was there for the last 2 years of the Trump administration, and this is not an indictment of President Trump, but it was Trump was attacking the intelligence community a lot, and I think that's fair to say. That's not a political statement. So when I retired, I wanted to speak out in public just to defend the men and women that I spent 26 years kind of in the trenches with. Not to attack the president, but just to say, hey, hold on a second, this is a little bit out of bounds. Like the intelligence community, just like our special operation warriors, are the unsung heroes of the last 20 years. Whether you agree with Afghanistan or not, in Iraq or not, we were there doing some tough stuff protecting America. And so I wanted to speak out. So I was quoted a bit in public. I also wrote a book on leadership, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But then finally, I was subject to what I think most experts believe was was one of these microwave attacks when I was visiting Moscow in December 2017. That led me to retire, and I've now been diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. So I'm getting treated at Walter Reed, but I had a bit of a public spat with the agency in terms of just getting access to health care. And so look, I never thought that I would be on, see myself on CNN or on the Today Show or certainly, being talked about in a Washington Post editorial. But it is what it is, and this is where my life journey has taken me, and so for better or worse, I have a bit of a public persona, but I want to do some good and both explaining to the American people what the intelligence community is all about, talking about my leadership principles, and also kind of arguing for healthcare and really for wellness programs for the intelligence community. So here I am today with you.
Yeah, man. And my intention was to brief that and then go back to the beginning of your life, the evolution of your life. But why don't we jump right into the Russia trip? So, I did
Sure.
some research, my recon prior to
Right.
talking with you tonight, my behind the scenes secret work.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I came across. And I didn't know that it was, obviously it's a very serious condition, but I didn't realize that it was attached with it, this media that you're talking about and this kind of boom and focus of attention. And so when I Googled your name and did some research, what came to be diagnosed as occipital neuralgia happened to you on a visit to Moscow, you said in 2017.
Yeah.
And then I get onto this thing that I had never heard of, the Havana syndrome. So it's like the bigger question, which we'll get into maybe after this, is, the reality. The CIA, to me, spies, espionage, like Homeland, the show Homeland, that's all similar to fighting. That's like an image or an impression, but you're in it and you actually lived it. So it's real and tangible to you. So before we get into that bigger impression of the CIA, I guess explain that, what happened to you when you went to Russia and the kind of consequences of.
Sure. So in December 2017, I made a trip to Moscow. I wanted to go see the ambassador, and I was pretty senior in CIA. I was one of the officers in charge of our clandestine operations in what we call Europe and Eurasia. So a span of almost 50 countries. And so I was also going there to talk to the Russian government. Even in the worst of bilateral relations, we still talk to our enemies. So that was part of the trip. And look, I woke up in the middle of the night during this 10-day trip. One of the nights with incredible vertigo, with tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears. I was getting physically sick. And so something really bad happened to me, and it started this kind of 3-year medical journey where I came back and there was a lot of mystery what happened. But ultimately, after seeing many doctors, I was diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury based on an exposure event. So something happened to me there. The reason why this became public is because I really had battled for a long time with the agency to get me proper medical care, which they unfortunately refused to do. So I took a really unusual step of going public and talking about this. Ultimately, the agency did the right thing, and I went to Walter Reed's National Intrepid Center of Excellence, which is their traumatic brain injury center. And these are with Navy SEALs and Green Berets, and the Special Operations Warriors have been going there for decades. And so I went there as well, and they diagnosed me with a traumatic brain injury. So I'm undergoing treatment there. But it's been kind of a wild ride in terms of going public, having a lot of my former colleagues upset with me for going public. Now they are much more understanding. And so that those attitudes have shifted. But ultimately it was to do something that I had to save myself, because I was kind of going into a dark period where I've had a headache every day for 3 years, and still do. I have tools now, to deal with this, and hope as well, because I found doctors who believe me. But ultimately it's been a hell of a journey.
So you mentioned going to Russia in regard, in my words, I'll probably butcher how you said it, but basically, regardless of the political standing of our country and another country, you still talk. I think that was the message. Like you said, regardless of what it is, you still have these conversations. So we'll get into your origins, where you're from, your upbringing, but how. So when I would go into a fight, it's you have an image of like what it'll be like. I watched Rocky growing up, and then there's the reality of it, like, wow, this is pretty overwhelming, but it's also real. Like you're also experiencing it, and you feel it and you see it, you smell it, et cetera. That's a fight that I signed up for. You're talking about like international relations. You're talking about like the biggest names in the world, maybe some of the biggest political players in the world. Like, is it surreal at all to you going in that situation? Or is it just one of those things, which I've spoken to military folks, where when you're in battle, you're trained to do it and you just do it and you reflect on it afterwards. But can you talk about those trips and those interactions?
That's a great question, because so let me just preface this with that. This trip was way kind of benign. It was just to have discussions with our counterparts in Russia. That's not what I really did. And this was after I was quite senior at the agency. So there's conceivably no danger involved. Ordinarily, I was a CIA operations officer. So if I'm going to Iraq or Afghanistan, or I'm doing, a meeting with an agent, I'm meeting a spy on the streets of a Middle Eastern country, with a Glock strapped to my hip, and I'm bearded up. That's when you put your game face on. That's like kind of your pre-fight, routine, when you're like, all right, this is real, and you got to be super sharp and super focused. The irony of me getting hit by this kind of microwave attack is that this is like if you were done with your fight and you're going down to get a Starbucks. I mean, ultimately, kind of, as I joke about all the enemies that I made over the years, whether it's, I don't know, Al Qaeda or the Taliban or Saddam Hussein's military or Hezbollah, I end up getting, kind of jammed up by the Russians, which ordinarily, in the CT wars, counterterrorism wars, the last 20 years, I wouldn't have put that high on my list of how, my time was finally up. But it's just one of those things. So interestingly, I didn't even have to have my game face on in Moscow in that trip. I just got hit, unfortunately, by kind of a really kind of nefarious, kind of nasty act. But I certainly would have expected that would have come, getting shot at in Iraq or Afghanistan or all the other crazy stuff I did over the years.
And so then let's segue to some of that crazy stuff,
Sure.
or the mindset, the mentality, the reality, the real time emotions that you go through during those times. And obviously, I don't know what you can and can't talk about, but
Sure.
maybe whether you're focused on one incident or just kind of collectively, I feel like people would say to me, I have a fanboy question about fighting, right? And I'm like, oh, whatever, I don't care. Ask whatever question you want. So I'm in a sense asking a fanboy question about the CIA because most people, I would say the vast majority of people, we only know what we see in movies and or read or hear in interviews, most of which is probably not the truth. So just take me through some of those experiences, some of the realities, maybe back to your early days when you realized like, whoa, this is really happening. Like this is really happening.
This is great. And one of the things that I was able to do over the last couple of years is I have a ton of operational stories that I actually have gotten cleared by the CIA, so I can talk about these. And so maybe I fudge details a little bit. Maybe it's nationality or time or place, but it really does give a kind of good reflection. And I'll give you kind of one of my favorite stories is, and this is the core of what makes up my old job as an operations officer. So when you join the CIA, you can go on the analytics side, you can go be a support officer, you can be in operations, and the job of an operations officer is to spot, assess, develop, recruit, and handle an agent. And an agent is not an American. An agent is someone we get to spy for us. So it's a foreigner who, for whatever reason, maybe because they like, they love American, their ideology, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Maybe they want their kids to come to school in America. Maybe they have a sick relative, but it could be a Chinese, Iranian, Russian, Pakistani, government official. So here's the story I tell, and that encapsulates the life of what operations were all about. I was a relatively young officer at the time, and I was handling a penetration of a Middle Eastern government. That means this individual, worked for government. It was not one of our friends. And and while we would handle him, meet him very clandestinely in his country, we spent several weeks I did with him, training him in a European city on kind of covert communications methods and how to detect surveillance. And he sat down with me one time and he said, "Hey, Mark, I want you to remember something." And I said, "Okay, what?" And he goes, "Hey, when we get back inside, I know you're going to think of me every 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe we meet every month and you're preparing for the meeting. And I know you have other stuff to do. But let me tell you something and this is what this guy's telling me. He goes, I think of you every day because if you make one mistake, not only am I going to get killed, but my entire family is going to get killed. So just, I want you to know this, that my life is in your hands. So please never forget that." And I was taken aback. So, here I am, maybe, 28, 30 years old. And this man and his family, are going to live or die based on how good I am at my job. And my job meaning tradecraft, meaning evading surveillance, meaning not making mistakes and meeting him on the streets of his country. And I love to tell that story because that's the essence of the CIA operational world, where you have this incredible personal bond with people who risk their lives to help the United States. And so I never forgot that. And I think that my favorite part of being a CIA operations officer, it was like a psychology 501 class, not a 101 class. Because, hey, you want to obtain that information, we want to get this to our policymakers, but never forget there's someone at the tip of the spear, and it ain't me. Everyone's like, "You're so brave." Actually, I'm not so brave. That person who's decided to betray his country to the United States and has put his life in my hands, that person's the brave one.
Talk about a source of accountability, or you hear a lot of people say, "Well, how do you find the inspiration? How do you find the motivation?" Like,
Yep.
knowing that this guy or girl or however many over the years lives are in your hands, that puts you in a position where you it's like if you have self, I guess, dignity or self-worth or whatever, then that right there solidifies why you do it.
And here's another really important point on this, and it's kind of like what you did as well in terms of being a fighter, but you're on your own. So a CIA operations officer is on their own when he makes that agent meeting. You have to make decisions on your own. Maybe I'll carry a lot of money with me to pay the agent. I have to certainly, use my tradecraft to evade surveillance to meet that individual. And there's decision points along the way, which you're going, it's methodical, where you're going to say, okay, I can go along with the meeting, but make no mistake, you're alone. Just like you, when you're getting in the ring, is alone. So there's nothing at the end of the day where I say, hey, my teammates let me down, or you make excuses here or there. Either you perform or you don't. In this case, someone's life is on the line. So those are the times you go in with your game face, no doubt.
Yeah, and you mentioned, if for a little bit of clarification for me anyway, if not the listeners, you mentioned the agent being the person who's working with you, who is of a different country, from a different country, and you being an operations manager. Can you maybe delineate the names of or the different roles, I guess, within the CIA? I would have thought an agent was, an American who goes overseas and does whatever.
Right, because you're thinking of the FBI has FBI agent. That's an American. But in the intelligence community, an agent is a foreigner we get to spy for us. So and that's obviously different than a CIA officer who is a member of the United States government. But again, within CIA, you have the operational side, and I kind of explained in what we do. The analytics side, who are usually back at our headquarters, who are taking the reports from our human sources, but also maybe from signals intelligence, from intercepts of communications, or maybe from open sources, reading the newspapers. And they're putting together, analytic products that will go to the president or the vice president, secretary of state to help formulate policy. And then there's our kind of support and logistics staff. It's great that we're kind of raising this, because it's actually going to later on to talk about my book. It's one of my principles. I call it the glue guy, but ultimately there's logistics and support personnel who are integral to what you do, even on the operational side. So, never forget that, those indispensable behind the scenes folks. And again, I go back to your world, the fight world, same thing. What about your trainers, your medical staff? Your success is what is publicized, but you kind of look back at maybe folks in the rear, or folks who have done things to help you prepare. And so, those are kind of the elements of CIA. And it takes a ballet for this all to work together. The operations side gets a lot of the drama and the glory, but I think I've been pretty clear in what I speak and what I write about, is that that ballet, that kind of synchronized unit. Man, it takes everyone, and certainly people. There are unsung heroes in the back that you have to always try to reward and remember.
Yeah, that's what as you're talking, I'm visualizing, and I think it's a mountain lion or some sort of wildcat, but they always say that if you see it, well, then it's too late, right? Like you're not. It is such that you don't see it, right? That's its life. And I'm thinking, as you're talking, the life of being in the CIA is unsung hero. Like, it's a lot of quiet work. If you do everything, if you execute as supposed to, then nobody knows, right? It's unnoticed because you're executing properly.
Everyone, all of us have in some fashion or another, their little, hero wall down in the basement or whatever it is. So, so down in my basement, there's pictures of me all over the world, and I'm, doing all my, cool guy stuff and, whatever. But what actually is most meaningful to me is there's 4 or 5 front page, pictures of the New York Times. And that's all I have on the wall. But these are operations that I either ran or was involved with that helped affect history. That stuff I can't talk about, but that is really meaningful. And, who I did talk about that with is new officers, new recruits who came into CIA. So whether I was running, I was the deputy of our operations department in the Middle East, and then I was the acting chief of our operations department in Europe and Eurasia, and then tons of work in counterterrorism. I would always take the new officers and I would say, hey, welcome to the CIA. You're not going to get a pat in the head from anybody in the public. Your family's never going to know, but you'll be able to affect history. And I would tell them the stories about, the stories behind those 5 front page New York Times covers. And that's what you signed up for. And I would also add is I wasn't all that remarkable. I'm here. I was well trained. I was lucky to have worked kind of in Middle East operations, and I just kind of raised my hand a lot. Hey, I'll do it. Let's go. And so it's a very unique job where I would say that 9 times out of 10 I would walk into work with kind of a little hop in my step, because you knew something was up, something was going to happen, and you could really make a difference.
Yeah, the magnitude. I mean, you just spelled it out there, but I was thinking, the magnitude of what you're dealing with. It's so easy to get lost in the minutia of day to day in my life and maybe your life present day, but the magnitude of what you were working on with those different operations, it has to be mind blowing. And as you were talking, I was thinking of this scene. This kind of another fanboy question. I don't know if it was Con Air or, one of the Nick Cage movies where he's driving away at the end. He says, "Honey, do you want to know who really killed JFK?" So like as a not just as a kid, but it's a fun game. If you could
Oh,
talk
sure.
to anyone from history, who would you want to talk to? If you could know any secret, what would you want to know? Let's talk a little bit about, again, probably in a fun way, but any way that resonates with you, that idea of realizing, you're setting out the course to become part of the CIA, and there are steps along the way, clearances along the way, knowledge and awareness along the way, where you start to kind of be on the inside as opposed to the outside.
Sure.
Talk about the
Right.
realities of that and the
Oh, yeah.
responsibility that goes with that.
Well, there's, the joke in retirement is, for me, the first time, I got to go outside and, get the paper or read it online because that's the only news I get. Well, in the past, I knew everything that was really happening. So, my dad would call up and say, "Hey, you hear what happened in this country?" And I'm like, "Yeah, don't worry about it," because I know the truth. But now I'm reading the paper like everybody else. No, I mean, there is a feeling that, we're part of kind of, a different world. That's not to say that the secrets are more important than really kind of things in the open source world. I think and this is a whole other issue, one of the challenges that the CIA is going to have is that there's an explosion of kind of open source information. So as a matter, it is important for us to try to penetrate someone in the Russian government who's going to tell us what Vladimir Putin is going to do tomorrow, right? But we also have an explosion of open source information where you can really kind of get an idea. There's 150,000 Russian troops, set to possibly invade Ukraine today. So, it's kind of a mixer that I think ultimately the charge that a lot of us got, and I think you probably got the feeling of this from talking to other special operations people in the special operations community, is that you're part of something special. You are a part of the tip of the spear, and so in my case, it was Afghanistan and Iraq when I spent a lot of time there, and I went there early on in the conflicts. And so, as my kids would be at home, and everyone has important jobs in life, but they'd be like, "Hey, where's your dad?" And he's like, "I don't know. I think he's in Iraq." And then my wife gets a phone call, right before the invasion, and he says, "Hey, it's someone from work calling, say, we just want to let you know your husband's going in now," and just crazy stuff like that, where it's actually normal at the time, but you look back when you're kind of done and you're having a beer and you're in your backyard and you're like, that was a pretty neat line of work to be involved in. And so you really just you feel special. You walk different, you walk taller, and the kind of the last point is you have camaraderie with those who kind of went through this with you. When I got back from Afghanistan, I was there from 2011 to 2012, my second stint. And the team that I was there with, we still meet every year at a local bar here just to tell war stories, because no one can ever take that from us. It was a pretty special time.
Yeah, man, that was kind of so I want to talk about family. We can push that to second here. I
Sure.
wanted to ask about that. Is it hard for you to operate in the regular world? Having been a part of such big, the grandioseness, the importance, the magnitude of those other things. And I know from camaraderie with wrestling and then fighting, like it's tough to then kind of live normally, for me anyway. And I'm curious if you hit that at all.
So that is a hard adjustment. I will say that, for me, my and perhaps it's the same as an athlete. My body kind of broke down, not only from kind of the microwave attack issue, but look, I remember in 2012, I was 43 years old, flying around in helicopters in Afghanistan. And I was going out on a patrol with our paramilitary officers, and I was a chief of a base, so I was older, but I was like, my back hurts. Like, I'm too old to do this, even back then. And so for me, like, my body's given out. I hurt all over still. And so in some sense, while I miss that stuff, and in fact, I had a conversation with someone the other day about this, like, I couldn't do it right now. It's a younger person's game. I have great friends from kind of naval special warfare, and then from our paramilitary side, we joke about our infiltration into Iraq in 2003, and the joke was, we didn't shower for 6 weeks, so I was just gnarly. It was disgusting. I thought it was awesome. It was great. Like, right now, like, man, I'm like, I don't know if I'm tough enough to do that.
Or
So,
you'd want to.
or would I want to, right? And so, it's a younger person's game, and that's good. And so, you kind of pass the torch to the younger generation. So while I miss that stuff terribly, I think it's almost like being a professional athlete in the sense of like if somehow you got back in the arena right now, like I couldn't do it. I don't know if you could do it, but it's so you don't live in the past. You certainly understand and live with those memories, and then my kind of thing now is to just talk about the future. So what I get off on now more is talking to younger officers or people in college. You say, hey, I'm interested in the intelligence community, or help me with this. So kind of push them in that direction. So you just your life just takes a different path as you get older, I think.
Yeah, and it's an evolution of value, priorities, and values. Also, like
Right.
physically, I probably could. Well, I think I could, but who knows?
Right.
But it's just like I don't want to. It's
Right.
very hard. I just don't
I
want to.
mean, flying in a helicopter for a couple hours, or all the stuff that I thought was fun
Not
before.
not
I'm just like,
shower for six
then
weeks.
shower for 6 weeks. Now it was fun then. Remember, I had more hair then. My hair was sticking up. It was terrible. It was great pictures of this. When I came back, I remember I had one shower before I got back to the States, and my wife's like, "Your ears are still black." And I said, "That's because I haven't showered for a month and a half." And she's like, "We thought we were gonna have this great reunion." She's like, "Get in the shower."
Yeah. Talk about that a little bit. You mentioned your wife. You mentioned your kids. I was
Yeah.
very curious. If you had a family, what it's like.
Sure.
I talked to several. I don't know, several Navy SEALs, several special ops people. And one of them, I think he shared the stat that it's like a 95% divorce rate in the special operations. So, I'm curious about that. How you work together to make it work, or the reality of it. I don't know the reality of it. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that and with your kids as well.
So the divorce rates are bad, but they're not that high. So because I think that the difference is in the special operations community, you deploy alone for maybe 8-9 months per year, and these guys and gals have been running full on for 2 decades, and so it's the exhaustion is there. That's a community that is really kind of paid the rent for us. CI is a little bit different. And so, for example, when I would go overseas, a lot of times, if it's not a war zone, Iraq or Afghanistan, and most of my career wasn't, but it would be to kind of Middle Eastern capitals. So we're working out of U.S. government facilities. So my family's with me. So they spent a lot of time with me. But I'll tell you, we all have made mistakes over the years. And so, I certainly, have been gone for 3 years out of my 26 year career. 3 years were away from my family. And even when when they were with me, I was working too hard. So my job's at night. So, the role of an operations officer is I have my day job, whatever kind of that is, which isn't really real. And then my night job will be go out to try to meet an agent on the street. And so it takes a toll on the families. I'll say that I worked very hard on it, my wife and I together. It wasn't always easy. My kids were incredibly understanding and they're proud, but they have crazy stories. I mean, in one Middle Eastern capital, the embassy was attacked by Al Qaeda, and my wife and I were both in the embassy. My kids were a mile away, hearing automatic weapons fire, seeing smoke rise up. They thought we were both dead. But here's the resilience of a CIA family. So a couple hours later, we kind of link up with them. They're really small. They're like 5 and 7 years old, I think. So they were traumatized. We go home. We're having a pizza. And they're getting calmed down, and I'm like, "Hey guys, I got to go out now." And my kids are like, "What?" And I said, today was a different day. Mom and Dad almost, had a really bad day, but I got to go find out who did this. So I got to go out in the streets." And they're like, "All right." And so, what kind of crazy family has their parents attacked? They go home, have a pizza, and then their dad goes out to try to find the perpetrators. And that's, my kids have flown on, C-17s, and they've met everyone from Arab princes to Predator pilots to Navy SEALs. So it's they've lived all over the world. It hasn't been cost free because they still talk about that time when they saw us almost get killed. But in the end, it's something we made work. But it takes a lot. And so, for example, if I had to go out at night, maybe I'd come home and have dinner with them. Like I didn't want to spend huge amounts of time away. But it's a strange life, and we always talk about CIA families. So there's and when I was managing younger officers, I'd be like, "Hey, take care of your wife or your husband, take care of your kids, because we need you for a 2 or 3 year sprint. I mean, I'm sorry, a 3 year marathon. Life's not a sprint here, and if you're unhappy at home, it's going to affect your professional life. So it's all encompassing."
How I want to draw a correlation to the military here in a second,
Yeah.
but how long were those trips? So I did, again, another thing I never thought about, so I certainly had no idea, but you would take your family with you on those trips. How long were those trips?
So we'd live in a country for 2 or 3 years. And they kids would go to school there. They go to international schools. So, my kids, one of the neat things now is because they grew up overseas, they're incredible. They have an incredible value system of being, they were the minority as an American. So now they have this incredible feeling of multiculturalism, and they're incredibly accepting of other, races, religions, because that's who they grew up around. And so they got this incredible exposure to the world. And so they're, I guess what's the right word? They're very tolerant of others. And I thought that was great. The times when it was hard is when I'd have to go, go away for 6 months or a year. And there were times, when we were the invasion of Iraq, I got a phone call, and they said, hey, we need you to go to northern Iraq. This is before the war in late 2002. And I told my family, hopefully I'll be back in a couple of weeks. And I came back, 7 months later. And so, I credit a lot of, you have to give tremendous credit to CIA families, just like military families for what they go through.
So how long, I'm trying to conceptualize this, how long were your kids, so out of their upbringing, right?
Yeah.
How many of those schooling years were
I think
overseas?
they spent about 10 years or so. And eventually they wanted to come back and go to high school in the States. So both of them went to high school in the US because we just made a decision as a family to do that. But, we have so many funny stories. And so, my son one day is looking at us. I come in the door coming home from work. And this is when I was based in the United States. And he just kind of walks by me and he's like, hey, Dad. I said, his name is Chris. I said, Chris, how you doing? He goes, did you guys drone anybody today? With a big smile on his face. I'm just, that's the stupid jokes we have, in our family. And I'm like, well, no, not really. And he's like, did you torture anyone? I'm like, we don't do that. That's a little tough. That's a sensitive subject. But, that's the kind of stuff
that's real. Like that's, that's his reality,
that's
and it's
reality.
Movies and TV to everyone else, but it's,
but they have this incredible sense of patriotism. And one of the things that I love talking about is, in one of our postings, which was a place which was, the U.S. was not friendly with this country. There's a lot of hostility towards us. But, we lived down the street from the U.S. Embassy, and the kids and we could always see the silhouette of the American flag at night, lit up. And so, not to get kind of political on standing, in the Pledge of Allegiance and, the Star Spangled Banner before athletic events, but the flag to us meant something. And so, those are the kind of the things where they come back from overseas and they appreciate America. And there's a lot of things, America's going through some tough times now. I'm not going to make this political at all, but they also experience life in the third world where there is no freedom of religion or press. And so to them, America is still the greatest country on the planet, even if we have our issues and we have to kind of work through them as we are.
Yeah, I've heard, and you can surmise as well, but that idea, there's a book that I read in which I first learned of it, but called the St. George in Retirement Syndrome, that like St. George was a saint that he used to slay dragons, and then all the dragons were gone, and the ending of the story is he's out in the yard or whatever, slashing at air, because there's no real battles to fight. So having been there and seen what real oppression, what real, it opened your eyes to give you perspective.
It really does. And I still, there's always this, there's no way I could have done this job without having the kind of the idea in my mind of America as the kind of shining city on the hill, because so many people in the third world, for example, want to come to America because it's a land of opportunity. They still believe that. And in some sense, if in comparison, to a third world dictatorship, of course it is. So those are things that kind of are still kind of with me today. And that's what kind of drove us through a lot of tough times is of course you're there, and you look to your left and to your right. If you're in Iraq or Afghanistan, you see people next to you, you want to get them through this, but you are doing it for a greater purpose. And I think for us, really, it was the 9/11 was something that drove a lot of us to really spend a lot of time away from our families, but to be really working for a greater good, which is to protect the American people, and all in the shadows.
Yeah. And then real quick, one last question about your family.
Sure.
What was that like the level of secrecy that you had to explain to your kid? Like, did they have an idea of what you did? And
Oh,
like,
so this is in every CIA family, you have the famous talk. When you sit the kids
every
down,
family you have the talk,
every
but
has
you
a
have a
famous
different
talk.
one.
That's right. And this was for both of our kids, and this was, of course, we should have known better. We said, hey, mom and dad got to tell you something. Dad actually does not work for the Department of State or Department of Army or whatever cover I had. Dad actually works for the CIA, and my daughter turns to my sons like they think we didn't know.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
we've known for a long time. And I was like,
That's
well,
hilarious.
how did you guys know? And he was like, well, let me tell you, we flew home one time on an airplane. It was with the deputy director. They hitched a ride back from the Middle East. And so, there's all these guys with guns in the counter assault team. And like, that's really not normal. And they kind of list all the things. And my wife and I then turned to each other and like, maybe we weren't so good after all.
That was my first thought.
If our 10-year-olds, figured this out, geez. But no, look, in the end, I think they're super proud of us. It's again, the notion of CI families, it's pretty amazing to see, over the years, also the people they grew up with in different posts around the world. And I'll tell you, one of my really good friends, and he's very senior in our service. His son is about to go through BUDS training to be a SEAL. Well, it's not an accident that some of our children kind of choose that path because they saw, what we did. And it's also very common for kind of a lot of our kids to continue on, want to work at the CIA as well.
I got chills when you said that because that, as a parent of small kids, how old are your kids now?
So they are 18 and almost one. My daughter's about to turn 21 tomorrow. Good God.
Fun.
Yeah.
You getting ready?
She's already told me the bar she's going to go to. I might make a sneak visit there. She's in college now, but
But yeah, I love the idea of that, passing on, I don't know, knowledge, skills, passion, drive to your kids. That's one of the most exciting parts that I see in parenting. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah, for sure.
So kind of let's circle back a little bit to present day and,
Sure.
Your book, Leadership Post CIA Career. I do want to talk about the food and dive bar aficionado. I do want to talk about some of that for fun here in a little bit, but talk about, your recent couple years, writing the book, getting in the book, formatting, the actual process of writing a book. I've written books and I love talking about that. So I hope the audience won't get lost and bored in the minutia of that, but I appreciate hearing those things. So how did the idea of the book come to fruition?
Sure. So look, so I spent 26 years in the CIA, and one thing that the agency doesn't do great is leadership training. The military does. So if you have a 20-year career in the military, as an officer, you're going to spend about 2 years in success, in 1 year stints going to actual leadership schools. CIA doesn't have that. And that's not a good thing, but we just don't. But what I did learn were several principles that I didn't even realize that I was kind of putting into motion. And so when I retired, I was sitting down, and leadership was my thing. I was considered a good leader. I might not be the smartest person in the world, but I was considered a good leader. So I wanted to kind of put on paper, what made me a success. And a couple things came to mind, and first and foremost is that out of like many professions, we learn from failure. So the key trait that I had was humility, and how to deal with adversity. And then the other part that I realized was I was most effective and I enjoyed it the most when times were really tough. So that's why, the book is called Clarity in Crisis, but because I loved operating in the gray. When you have ambiguity, when kind of the crap has hit the fan, other people want to run, but this was kind of my happy place. And so I kind of thought back, I'm like, why am I so comfortable being able to operate so effectively there? And I realized that there were some core things that I did over the years. A lot of it, not only building myself, but building teams that allowed us to work as a unit when times were really tough. And I always, there's lots of kind of catchy slogans you can use, but it's having no fear when there's complete ambiguity, and when others want to flee, you want to run towards that crisis, and then being happy there.
So real quick, because I want to get into some of them, and I have a couple of principles written down here, and you can elaborate on the book's content. But I'm curious, you may have just explained it, but maybe it's two-part. I was going to ask, is that inherent? I'm very much the same way. If there's an uncomfortable conversation, I'm like, hey, let's talk about this uncomfortable thing right now. And everyone else is like, ugh. Like that, what you just said, right? Not wanting to run, but being in that, and that's where you shine, that ambiguity or the danger or the question, suspense. Is that internal in you from the beginning, or was that learned along the way through skill acquisition?
So that is definitely learned along the way. And that to me was most interesting. And it's learned a lot based on failure. And so, again, I joked about that, that place in my basement with all the hero stuff on the walls. That's not what the book is about. The book is more about how I got kind of kicked in the head so many times that I learned lessons. And so I think, and one of the key principles, and is that kind of indefatigable. I'm going to get. I can't even say that right, but it's this ability to just overcome adversity time and again. And so I talked about how I didn't learn any of this from an MBA. I don't have an MBA. I love listening now to leadership podcasts, and I start listening to them, like yours and others, and I'm like, wow, these people are so much smarter than me. But my principles are based on real world experiences, based on a ton of failing, and always getting back to kind of be in the fight. And so that's why I think it's kind of really going to be relatable to folks, because ultimately what I always thought of is I want people to be with me in the fight who have been kicked and who have gotten up. And a superstar to me is someone who like Michael Jordan, who got cut from his high school basketball team. And so it's kind of those kind of folks. And so I think it really is gonna resonate. I believe in it. It worked. And one of the neat things about the book is I have tons of operational examples to show how it does. And then kind of the final point is this book and these principles. Look, we live in this world, kind of this type A personality, alpha male, alpha female world. But that's like, the book's got to resonate with a librarian in Cincinnati.
I know for a fact it's going to resonate with me, because everything you're saying here is kind of what I think as well. And nothing against academics, nothing against, PhDs or whatever. But, my brother has often said to me, man, you should get a PhD just because you love to read and you love to learn so much. But my thought is like, I don't want someone to tell me what I have to read, or like, I want to learn it. I want to do it. I want to build my own business and share those failures along the way. But it's a very everyday man's type of approach. It sounds like what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's kind of meat and potatoes, and it works. And I'm super interested. I think it's going to resonate. But I'm really interested to see kind of people's reactions to this, because I could almost imagine like the MBA leadership genre will kind of scoff at this, in kind of a highbrow, lowbrow manner. Yet regular people are going to say like, hey, that makes sense. Got it. I get that, and I'm going to employ that. And so, here we go. One of the things you do when you write a book, you'd asked me before, is talk about exposing yourself. Oh boy, there's a lot of people who can kind of, you put yourself out there to really get knocked down. Same as going into a fight. Like, I always joke, this book is either going to be a smash success or I'm going to fall on my face. So let's go,
But yeah, I was going to say, but you've fallen on your face before. And you mentioned the putting yourself out there at the beginning of this conversation. You mentioned putting yourself out there in regard to the healthcare from the CIA and even just putting your story out there. And I know that SEALs get, ragged on a good bit for writing books, and, there's a division of whatever people think, but that's just the reality of the world and critique. And as you face you said you face critique from your peers, but you're going to get people. I mean, my guess is at least one person is going to say this book is terrible.
Oh, of course. Right.
So you can't escape that. And it's just a reality of putting yourself out there.
Let me give you a great example of that. So, and I think I'm going to be fine. It's going to be a success, but I'm going to be okay with some of the criticism, because we did something at CIA called 360 feedback, and it can be pretty effective. So basically, you do it with your bosses, your peers, and people and your subordinates. And one subordinate of mine once wrote to me, and you got to take this stuff seriously. They said, Mark thinks he's a lot smarter than he really is. I was like, oh man. But then they added, and he's got to be careful in what he says, because people actually listen to him. So, he's got to choose his words more carefully. So, you got to have thick skin when you go in my old line of work. And so, jumping into the literary world, it's kind of the same thing. You had asked me a question about how this started. I was, I wanted to write a book. My stepbrother was getting married in Brooklyn, New York a couple of years ago, and I ran into a high school friend who happened to be this like super agent. He's like Ari out of Entourage, like out in LA. And I told him about this. He goes, I'm going to introduce you to someone in William Morris Endeavor, WME, which is a huge literary agency. They just bought IMG. So this is the big dog in Madison Avenue. And I went in there, and the first meeting didn't go so well. But they're like, if you're serious, come back with this kind of with an outline. And so I took some time. I wrote a 40-page outline, got these crazy op stories cleared by the CIA. I came back, and my agent, who's still my agent now, is like, this is freaking amazing. Like, this like we know Navy SEALs have written books. Like their joke was like, if you go through Bud's training, you also get your book deal then. And all my SEAL buddies get pissed at me when I say that. But no CIA people, a person has written a book like this. And then we pitched it to HarperCollins, and they bid immediately. So then they come back and they're like, okay, in 6 months you owe us a 200-page book. And I was like, uh-oh, now I got to do this.
Yeah.
Again, same thing is like, so I would write for 1 or 2 hours each day. I was suffering still with the health effects because I had the headaches, but 2 hours in the morning, I would be able to kind of work on it, and had some great editors and great help from some folks, and here we are.
So there's two things I want to kind of call back from earlier. One of them was, I mentioned, you said how much you enjoy talking to incoming agents, and yeah. I had mentioned an analogy with the military, but a friend of mine, Chad, and his wife Julie. He just retired from the Air Force, and I went down and I spoke on his base down in Florida. And one of the things that was like one of the neatest they're just great people in general. But then one of the neatest aspects of his base or everything I saw was the fact that Julie, who is Chad's wife, she ran an informal, it's not even, it's like support really for the other spouses of the people in the military. So that helped tremendously, if not only to hear, this is what you're going to experience, this is how we coped with it, and we'll help you cope with it.
Right.
So that was what I want to call back there. And then you mentioned, and this is, a heavy thing, but you mentioned, which is an obvious truth, that you have setbacks on the sometime in life. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose and then you win. But when we're talking about setbacks and failures in the CIA, we're talking about lives. And right. I read a Malcolm Gladwell book, Talking to Strangers, relatively recently, and he talked about it was a CIA mishap, might have been like one of the biggest ones ever, with Cuba and Castro. And so when there are things that go wrong, lives are lost, if not always, oftentimes. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that within the agency? In that, is it just accept? Obviously, you feel and you remorse and you process, but is it also at the same time an understanding of this is the line of work we're in? Like, how do you balance that?
Sure. So so first of all, there is risk involved, and in particularly with war zone service, and I talk a lot about it in my book, that there was an operation that I ran where several of our officers were killed, and how I dealt with that is it was incredibly difficult for me, but it's also the idea of accountability and responsibility and learning that humility. I'll never forget, having to stand up in front of, my officer who'd been killed, standing up in front of our unit, our station, and telling the several hundred people that this individual, was not coming home. And, and I remember one young officer, she dropped, and I still can kind of hear her wails of grief. And it was terrible, not only because I felt partly responsible, but, this is someone who worked for me and who was a close colleague. So, unfortunately, it's part of a line of work. There's 133 stars on the wall at CI headquarters. Unfortunately, in the 20 years since 9/11, I know a lot of these, a whole bunch of these folks who were killed. So while you accept the risk, it's never easy at all. And that's not even talking about the Americans who've been killed. I've also had our agents killed, meaning the foreigners, spies who we've recruited, who have died in the line of duty as well. One of them I talk about in my book quite a bit, because it's I was kind of at fault in this, and it even goes to one of my leadership principles, where I push this individual as an Iraqi to obtain intelligence that Washington and headquarters was loving. He was on the order of battle of the Iraqi military in early 2003, and I pushed him too hard, and he got caught and he got executed. And so as I thought back on that, that was my adversity, and it's one of my principles. I call adversity as the PED to success. So I really learned from that operation, where years later in Afghanistan, where we had a kind of a similar agent who was trying to obtain information on a high value target. I didn't push as hard. I was much more patient. I learned, and very much thought along the way, hey, I'm not going to make those same mistakes. And this individual ended up providing us intelligence where we killed a Taliban member, and that Taliban member was responsible for the deaths of 2 CIA officers several years earlier. And so, all this discussion today comes full circle. It's adversity, what happened to me, losing someone in Iraq, learning from it, and then avenging the deaths of some of our officers by killing a senior Taliban member. And I'll close that story. That night, from Eastern Afghanistan on a satellite phone, we called one of the widows of one of our officers who had been killed, back in Fort Bragg, and told him we had avenged her husband's death. And so, that's what this whole kind of thing is all about. And so, the agency allows me to tell that story, but it was really meaningful because, at the end of the day, it's the people to your left and right of you who really matter. And we avenged our colleagues.
Yeah. On to a little bit lighter of a subject. Talk about your food and dive bar aficionadoship.
So I can't help myself with that. So there's a bar in Northern Virginia. It's called the Vienna Inn. I live in Vienna, Virginia, and it's a kind of a legendary CIA hangout. And it's just a dingy, nasty, dirty bar. The floors are never kept clean. The tables are old. There's pictures all along the wall. But it's 10 miles from CIA headquarters. So it's a place where we congregate constantly, and also where the town of Vienna does. It's a suburb in DC. And so, it's one of those things where, and again, one of my principles that I talk about is family values. And that's kind of that's kind of easy to say, but what that means is team building. And so our teams over the years have met constantly at this one location. So it means something so much that, in Afghanistan at the US, at our station there in Afghanistan in Kabul, there's on the wall, on the roof of it, on the ceiling, there's a Vienna Inn t-shirt. At the Vienna Inn right now, there's, in a glass enclosed case of a Vienna Inn baseball hat that I wore for a year in Afghanistan. And so, so it's a reflection of, first of all, my love of dive bars, but also, having that community place. It's a safe place where we can all gather. They also have kind of world famous chili cheese dogs that win all sorts of competitions. And it's just, if you like that kind of small town feeling, it's just a wonderful place. And, the kind of the neat thing is during COVID, where we really worried about, the viability of small establishments like that. And the town pitched in and we were doing takeout from them all the time, and they set up a big tent out back. And so it's neat. I don't know. I think I might've seen on your site, there's a book called Three Wise Men by Bo Weiss and Tom Saleo. So Tom Saleo is a native of Vienna.
Oh yeah.
Bo Weiss, his brother Jeremy, of course, was killed working for us in Afghanistan. So I arranged to have a book event for them next month, where we're going to just kind of rent out the Vienna Inn. It's going to be packed.
And that's down your way.
Yeah, it's right down our way. So again, it's a weird small town dive bar that has this kind of greater meaning for the intelligence and special operations community, and great chili dogs and cold beer.
Is that public or no? Would that for the public?
Oh yeah, for sure.
I might make a trip down. I'm
all right.
A couple hours away from you.
That would be fantastic. I think it's going to be let me take a look. It's up on my whiteboard. It's going to be on the 28th, between 4 and 6 o'clock. Boy, Tom and Bo are going to be happy. I'm publicizing their event now.
Wow.
So that's what the place really means. And boy, there's retired CIA folks there. There's current CIA folks there. Someone said to me, "Why do you keep talking about the Vienna Inn in public? Like, don't you think the Russians are going to come, or Al Qaeda?" I'm like, they could never walk in the door there. That's like, that's a place like Cheers. Every single person is known by everybody. So it's a very safe place. And, so you're welcome anytime. Let me know.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Where are you originally from?
So boy, I have an interesting upbringing. So I was actually born in Greece. My dad was was studying in the United States, met my mom, who was a nice girl from Long Island. He was Greek. He went back to do his Greek military service after he received his PhD. He was a university professor. So I was born in Athens, then we came back. I grew up in New Jersey, but still had those kind of Greek roots. So we travel back every summer. But it's, I kind of fell in love with traveling, and people ask me how I got to the CIA, and I fell in love with the Middle East when I was 10 years old. My dad was doing a sabbatical. He was teaching in Algeria, and so can't even believe my mom did this. She put me on a plane alone. I flew by myself, from Jersey, like through probably Paris to Algiers, and my dad and I, an old beat up Volkswagen minibus, drove for 1 month, 2,000 miles through the Sahara Desert, sleeping in oases. And I thought I was Lawrence of Arabia. And after that, I wanted to kind of
cool. That's so cool.
See the world. And my dad, who was kind of not always thrilled about me joining the CIA, just because of the danger involved, I was like, it's your fault. Yeah, you took me on that trip when I was 10. Sorry.
Have you ever read The Alchemist?
I have.
It kind of reminds me. He goes to the desert. They're on their way to Egypt, but it kind of reminds me.
No, people have these kind of seminal events. I look back in my life, and there's a book called Caravans by James Mitchner, and it's about a young State Department Foreign Service officer, in the 1950s. And Mitchner wrote these kind of dramatic books, but I read that book when I was in high school and loved it. And I'll tell you, in 2000, when was this? This was early 2002. I was on one of the teams in Afghanistan. 9/11 happened, and then we went in, and I was in Kandahar. Or actually, I was up in Helmand Province. I was assigned to our base in Kandahar, but I was up in Helmand Province meeting with some local villagers. So I'm sitting there cross-legged across from an Afghan who hadn't seen anyone since the Soviet times. I was an American, and I literally thought back to reading that book in high school about Afghanistan, and thought, what an amazing journey this has been. So you kind of look back in your life as, how did I end up doing this? But there was a couple things along the way, and kind of led me to this life.
Back in 2012, I did a tour it wasn't with UFC, but it was with other fighters, and we went. They didn't say Middle East. I think they said Southwest Asia. Like that was the terminology.
Yeah.
But I got to see all kinds of different. We were in six countries overall,
that's awesome.
And it was so awesome. Just the culture and the food, everything about it was awesome. And as my kids grow, but also COVID hit, I just absolutely cannot wait to be able to start traveling with them and showing them the world.
Yeah, no, I missed. I mean, this has been a hard year, and it's thank goodness we're kind of emerging from that. But boy, it's been tough, because that was my life too. I mean, again, we talked about dive bars. I mean, I could sit here and talk to you for 2 hours about the best airlines, or how to manipulate a seat on business class, or the best hotels around the world, or the best bars in different countries around the world.
Sounds like a good podcast. I don't know if you're looking for things to do, but it sounds like it'd be fun. Well, this has been great, man. The book, Clarity in Crisis, Leadership Lessons from the CIA, comes out June 8th, is what it said on Amazon. Pre-order is available now. I will definitely be getting a copy and covering it on the show here in a couple months. But, any send-offs or where people can find you, please feel free to share.
Sure. So the landing page, the book's website, I think it's coming up today or tomorrow. It's I got to get it right. ClarityandCrisisBook.com, which will have a little bit about me and all the places you can buy it. It is on pre-sale, coming out on 8 June. My Twitter handle is at @mpolymer, and I talk about all sorts of crazy stuff, whether it's intelligence stuff. I'm trying to stay away from politics, but I can't help myself sometimes. Talk about baseball, or certainly kind of dive bars and food. So there's no rules on any of that, but it's awesome coming on here today. I think you and I probably have a ton in common, where we could speak for another couple hours, because it's a lot of fun.
I agree, man, and I'm really gonna try to make a point to come down there for that event, because I think it'd be awesome to meet those guys, but also hang out with you in person.
Actually, you are welcome to anytime.
All right, man. Thanks, Marc.
Thanks. Appreciate it.